emergency beacon cut through the static of deep space like a scream in the darkness. Captain Marcus Chen stared at the flickering display aboard his cargo hauler. The Endurance pressed the distress signal painted coordinates across his navigation screen. The transmission originated from Kepler Station, a forgotten outpost on the edge of hegemony space that had been silent for 3 standard months. Marcus ran a weathered hand through his graying hair. At 52, he had seen
to know
enough
that
of the
answering
galaxy's
distress calls
cruelties
usually
to
meant
know that
walking into
answering
someone
distress
else's
calls
nightmare.
usually meant walking into
The
someone
smart
else's
play would be to
nightmare.
report the signal.
The smart play would be to report the signal to Hegemony Command and continue his milk run to the Tau colonies. But the transmission carried a desperation that reminded him why he had left Earth's military 20 years ago. Sometimes doing the right thing mattered more than doing the smart thing. Computer, plot intercept course for Kepler Station, he ordered, settling into the pilot's seat of his one-man operation. Warning, Kepler Station is located in disputed territory. Hegemony protection protocols are not guaranteed in this sector. The ship's AI responded in its carefully neutral tone. Noted and ignored. Execute course change. The Endurance groaned as its aging engines pivoted the ship toward the distress beacon. Through the viewport, Marcus watched the starfield shift as they altered course, leaving the safety of established shipping lanes for the lawless frontier where the Hegemony's influence faded like whispers in a storm. Kepler Station had been built during the expansion era, when humanity still believed the galaxy would welcome them with open arms. The cylindrical structure housed nearly 10,000 beings from a dozen species, serving as a trading post and refueling depot for ships traveling the outer rim. It had been a symbol of interspecies cooperation, until the Hegemony decided that human settlements were growing too influential in their territory. The journey took 18 hours. Marcus spent the time reviewing what little intelligence he could access about the station's last reported status. According to the records, Kepler had gone dark during a routine inspection by Hegemony forces. The official report listed administrative complications as the reason for the communication blackout. Marcus knew bureaucratic doublespeak when he heard it. Administrative complications usually meant someone had decided the station's continued existence was inconvenient. As the Endurance dropped out of hyperspace, Marcus felt his stomach tighten at the sight before him. Kepler Station hung in the void like a wounded animal, its hull scarred with blast marks and debris floating in lazy orbits around its superstructure. Several docking ports had been blown open from the inside, and the station's rotation had slowed to an irregular wobble. "Jesus," Marcus whispered, running a sensor sweep across the station. The scans revealed massive internal damage, failing life support in most sections, and energy readings so low the station was running on emergency power alone. But there were still life signs. Faint, scattered, but unmistakably present. Marcus opened a communications channel. "Kepler Station, this is cargo hauler Endurance responding to your distress beacon. Please respond." Static filled the channel for several long seconds before a weak voice crackled through the speakers. "Endurance. Thank the ancestors you came. This is Dr. Peem, Yara Sethes, acting station commander. We're in bad shape here." The voice carried the clicking accent of a Hegemony Takri, one of the insectoid species that dominated the Galactic Council. Marcus had dealt with Takri before. They were logical, efficient, and typically viewed humans as useful, but ultimately expendable. "Sethes, what's your status? Sensors show major structural damage and failing life support." A pause then. "Hegemony forces attacked us 6 days ago. They said we were harboring human insurgents. Most of the population was evacuated, but," the voice broke, "we have wounded who couldn't be moved. Emergency power won't last another day." Marcus studied the tactical display. The station's defense grid was completely offline, and he could see the distinctive scorch marks of Hegemony plasma weapons across its hull. This hadn't been a precision strike, it had been a massacre. "How many survivors?" he asked. 43 beings in the medical bay, including another pause. Longer this time. "Captain Chen, we have children here, mostly human children whose families were killed in the attack." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had left military service because he was tired of watching politicians use children as pawns in their games. Now it seemed he couldn't escape it even in the outer rim. "I'm coming aboard," he said. "Guide me to the nearest intact docking port. Captain, I must warn you, if Hegemony forces return and find you here, they won't hesitate to destroy your ship. Helping us makes you an enemy of the state." Marcus was already plotting an approach vector. "Doctor, I've been an enemy of the state since the day I was born human. It's nothing new." The docking procedure took 20 minutes of careful maneuvering around debris fields and damaged station modules. Marcus sealed his ship's airlocks and checked his portable atmosphere suit. The station's environmental systems were clearly compromised, and he wasn't taking any chances. The airlock cycled with a grinding sound that spoke of damaged machinery operating on borrowed time. As the inner door opened, Marcus stepped into a scene from a nightmare. The corridor beyond was lit only by emergency lighting strips, casting everything in a hellish red glow. The walls showed blast damage from small arms fire, and the air carried the acrid smell of burned electronics mixed with something Marcus tried not to identify. His boots crunched on debris as he followed the painted emergency signs toward the medical bay. Dr. Sethis met him halfway, and Marcus was shocked by her appearance. The Takri physician was missing 2 of her 4 arms, and her usually immaculate carapace was cracked and stained with dried bodily fluids. Despite her injuries, she moved with the determined efficiency of someone who had been holding disaster at bay through pure force of will. "Captain Chen," she clicked in greeting, her voice weaker in person than it had been over the comm. "Thank you for coming." "I was beginning to think no one had received our beacon." "Others might have received it," Marcus replied, following her through the damaged corridors. "But most would have decided the risk wasn't worth it. And you?" Marcus stepped over a collapsed beam that blocked half the corridor. "I had nothing better to do today, Doctor." Sethis made the clicking sound that passed for Takri laughter. "Humans," she said. "Your species has the strangest sense of humor in the galaxy." They reached the medical bay, and Marcus understood why the doctor had sounded so desperate. The room had been converted into a makeshift shelter, with survival blankets stretched between damaged medical equipment to create privacy screens. Emergency lighting cast moving shadows across the faces of the survivors, a mix of species huddled together in small groups. But it was the children that made Marcus's chest tighten. Most appeared to be human, ranging in age from perhaps 5 to 15 standard years. They sat quietly in a corner of the room, their faces carrying the hollow expression of young people who had seen too much violence too quickly. The attack came without warning. "Doctor," Sethi explained as they moved through the medical bay. "The hegemony claimed we were running weapons to human resistance cells. They gave us 6 hours to evacuate all human personnel, but some families had nowhere to go. The outer colonies won't take refugees without proper documentation, and Earth hasn't been accepting return immigrants since the resource wars." Marcus nodded grimly. He knew the political situation all too well. Humanity had spread across dozens of star systems during the expansion era, but when resources became scarce and the hegemony began restricting human settlements, millions of people found themselves trapped between worlds, too human for alien societies, too alien for Earth's increasingly isolationist government. When the families refused to leave, the hegemony decided to make an example. "Doctor," Sethis continued, "they killed the adults and left the children here to send a message." "What kind of message?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "That humans who resist the hegemony's authority will watch their children die slowly on forgotten stations where no one can help them." Marcus felt his jaw clench. It was a psychological warfare tactic as old as conflict itself. Break the enemy's will to fight by making them choose between resistance and their family's safety. The hegemony had learned that humans would endure almost any personal suffering, but threatening their children was a line that broke even the strongest spirits. "How long before life support fails completely?" he asked. 18 hours, maybe 20 if we shut down non-essential systems. But some of these children need constant medical attention. Without power for the equipment, she gestured helplessly with her remaining arms. Marcus surveyed the medical bay, calculating space and resources. His ship could carry perhaps 20 people in emergency conditions, but 43 survivors would require multiple trips, time they didn't have if hegemony forces returned. It was then that he noticed her. In the farthest corner of the medical bay, partially hidden behind a damaged diagnostic scanner, sat a small figure that made Marcus's heart skip. She appeared to be perhaps 7 years old, with the pale skin and dark hair common among the outer colony populations. But it wasn't her appearance that struck him. It was the way she sat perfectly still, watching everything with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. Unlike the other children, she wasn't huddled with a group. She sat alone, her small hands folded in her lap, observing the adults with the patient attention of someone who had learned that survival meant staying invisible. "Who's the girl in the corner?" Marcus asked quietly. Dr. Sethis followed his gaze and her mandibles clicked sadly. "Zara Chen, 7 years old. Her parents were killed in the first wave of the attack. They were engineers who helped design the station's defense grid. She hasn't spoken since we found her hiding in the maintenance tunnels 3 days ago." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Her last name is Chen? A coincidence, I assume. Chen is a common surname among the outer colony families. But Marcus wasn't sure it was a coincidence. His brother David had immigrated to the outer colonies 15 years ago, part of the wave of humans seeking opportunities away from Earth's increasingly crowded core worlds. They had lost touch after David married a colony engineer and settled on one of the frontier stations. As if sensing his attention, the girl looked up and met his eyes across the medical bay. For a moment, Marcus felt the universe shrink to just the two of them, a damaged man haunted by his failures, and a child who had lost everything in a war she was too young to understand. That was when she stood up and walked toward him. The other children watched her movement with curious eyes, but none followed. She approached Marcus with the careful steps of someone who had learned that sudden movements could be dangerous, stopping just close enough to speak without being overheard. Marcus knelt down to bring himself to her eye level, the way he had been trained to do when dealing with traumatized civilians during his military service. "Hello," he said gently. "I'm Marcus. What's your name?" She stared at him for several long seconds, her dark eyes searching his face as if looking for something. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Zara. That's a pretty name. Dr. Sethis tells me you've been very brave." The girl tilted her head slightly, studying him with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. Children weren't supposed to look at the world with such measured calculation. "Are you here to take us away?" she asked. "I'm going to try," Marcus replied honestly. "But my ship isn't very big. It might take some time to get everyone to safety." Zara nodded as if she had expected this answer. Then she stepped closer and did something that shattered every emotional defense Marcus had built over 20 years of military service. She looked up at him with those impossibly old eyes and whispered, "Will you be my father?" The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Around the medical bay, conversations continued in low voices, but he felt as if the universe had suddenly gone silent except for the sound of his own heartbeat. "Zara, he began, then stopped. "How did you explain to a 7-year-old that the galaxy was a complex place where good intentions weren't enough? That he was just a cargo hauler with an aging ship and enough enemies to fill a small moon? That, taking responsibility for a child in the middle of a war zone, was the kind of commitment that could get them both killed?" But looking into her eyes, Marcus saw something that changed everything. It wasn't just hope, it was recognition. This child had looked at him and seen something worth trusting, something worth believing in. In a universe that had spent years teaching her that humans were expendable, she had chosen to place her faith in a stranger with kind eyes and a willingness to help. "I'll try," he whispered back. Zara smiled then, the first genuine expression of happiness anyone had seen from her since the attack. She reached up and took his hand in both of hers, holding on as if she would never let go. Marcus looked around the medical bay at the other survivors, then at Dr. Sethis, who had been watching their exchange with what might have been approval in her compound eyes. "Doctor," he said, standing while keeping Zara's small hand firmly in his grip, "I need you to send a message on an encrypted channel. Tell them that Marcus Chen is calling in every favor he's ever been owed." "What kind of message?" she asked. Marcus smiled grimly. "The kind that's going to piss off the hegemony even more than they already are." The encrypted message went out on a frequency that hadn't been used in 5 years, carrying a code phrase that Marcus had hoped he would never need again. Within 2 hours, responses began filtering back through the ship's communication array. Brief acknowledgements from cargo haulers, mining vessels, and independent traders scattered across 3 star systems. Marcus sat in the Endurance's cramped communications booth, Zara curled up asleep in the navigator's chair beside him, while he coordinated what amounted to the largest humanitarian operation the Outer Rim had seen since the hegemony crackdown began. The first ship to arrive was the Lucky Strike, a modified mining hauler captained by Sarah Kim, a former Earth Navy engineer who had been running freight between the asteroid belts for the past decade. Her ship could carry 15 people in emergency conditions. Not comfortable, but alive. "Marcus, you magnificent bastard." Sarah's voice crackled through the comm as her ship began docking maneuvers. "When I got your message, I thought someone was playing a joke. The Marcus Chen I knew would never stick his neck out this far for strangers." Marcus glanced at Zara, who was stirring in her sleep, and felt something tighten in his chest. "People change, Sarah. How long can you stay in system? Long enough to evacuate whoever you've got. But my sources say hegemony patrol ships are scheduled to sweep this sector in 36 hours. If we're still here when they arrive, we won't be," Marcus assured her. "Just dock and start loading passengers." Prioritize the wounded and the youngest children. The evacuation began immediately. Dr. Sethis had organized the survivors with typical Takri efficiency, preparing medical status reports and prioritizing who could travel under harsh conditions. The most critically wounded would go first, along with the youngest children who needed constant care. Marcus found himself torn between the practical demands of coordinating multiple ships and the emotional reality of watching families say goodbye to the only home many of them had ever known. Some of the survivors had lived on Kepler Station for decades, building lives and communities that were now being scattered across the galaxy like seeds on the wind. As the Lucky Strike finished loading its passengers, 2 more ships arrived in quick succession. The Wanderer, a passenger liner that had been converted for cargo hauling, and the Iron Phoenix, a heavy freighter whose captain owed Marcus a favor from their military days. Captain Torres of the Iron Phoenix was a gruff man who had lost his left arm in the same battle where Marcus had decided to leave the service. They exchanged brief nods as Torres supervised the loading of his passengers, mainly the adult survivors who could handle the cramped conditions of a military-style transport. "This is either the dumbest thing you've ever done, or the most human," Torres said as they watched a group of Takri engineers help elderly survivors board his ship. "Probably both," Marcus replied. "You sure you can get them to safety?" "I've got contacts in the freelance systems. They're not much, but they don't ask questions about refugees as long as they can work." Torres paused, looking at Zara, who was helping Dr. Sethis organize medical supplies. "What about the girl?" Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "She comes with me." "Marcus, raising a kid while running cargo is not your problem." Marcus cut him off. "I made her a promise." Torres studied his old friend for a moment, then shrugged. "Your funeral." But for what it's worth, she could do worse for a father. As the rescue operation continued, Marcus began to understand the scope of what they were attempting. This wasn't just about evacuating survivors from a damaged station. They were extracting people from an entire way of life. Many of these families had been part of the outer colony movement, believers in the dream that humans could build something better among the stars than what they had left behind on Earth. Now that dream was ending, one destroyed station at a time. Between ship arrivals, Marcus found himself spending time with Zara, teaching her basic ship operations and helping her understand what their life together might look like. She was remarkably intelligent for her age, absorbing information about navigation, life support, and cargo management, with the quick comprehension of someone who had grown up around technology. "My daddy used to let me help him with the station's defense computers," she told him, as they calibrated the ship's sensor array. "He said I had good eyes for patterns."
"What kind of patterns?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious.
Zara pointed to the tactical display showing the movements of the rescue ships. "Like how Captain Kim always approaches from the same angle because her port thruster is weaker than her starboard. Or how Captain Torres keeps his weapons powered even though he's trying to look peaceful." Marcus looked at the display with new eyes and realized she was right. Sarah's approach pattern showed a slight compensation for reduced maneuverability, and the energy readings from the Iron Phoenix indicated active weapon systems despite their humanitarian mission.
"You see all that just by watching the sensors?" Zara nodded seriously.
"Daddy said most people don't pay attention to the details, but details are what keep you alive." Marcus felt a chill as he realized this 7-year-old child had already learned lessons that had taken him years of military service to understand. The attack on Kepler Station hadn't just killed her parents, it had forced her to grow up in ways no child should have to experience. By the end of the first day, they had successfully evacuated 38 of the 43 survivors. Only Marcus, Zara, Dr. Sethis, and 2 Thackeray engineers remained aboard the station, along with one human teenager named Jake, who had refused to leave without his missing younger sister. The sister, Emma, had been separated from the group during the initial attack and was believed to be hiding somewhere in the station's vast maintenance sections. Jake, who was perhaps 16 years old, had been searching for her for 6 days with the desperate determination of someone who had already lost everything else. "We can't wait much longer," Dr. Sethis warned as they gathered in the medical bay to plan their final sweep of the station. "Life support in the outer sections has been failing steadily." If she's in one of those areas, Marcus understood what the doctor wasn't saying. After 6 days without food or water, and with environmental systems failing throughout the station, the chances of finding Emma alive were becoming increasingly remote. But Jake wasn't ready to give up. "She's smart," he insisted. "Smarter than me. She knows the maintenance tunnels better than anyone. If there's a way to survive in there, she'll find it." Marcus looked at the boy's determined face and saw something of himself at that age. The stubborn refusal to accept that sometimes good people died for bad reasons. It was a lesson he had learned in the military, but apparently one he wasn't ready to teach to someone else. One more sweep, he decided. But we do it systematically, and we don't take unnecessary risks. Dr. Sethis, can you access the station's internal sensor grid? The Tarkri physician clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. The main sensors are offline, but the maintenance section has its own environmental monitoring system. If she's moving around, we might be able to detect her body heat or respiratory patterns. They spent the next 4 hours methodically searching the station's lower levels, following faint sensor readings and calling out Emma's name in every maintenance tunnel and service corridor they could access. The emergency lighting had failed completely in most sections, forcing them to rely on portable lamps that created moving pools of light in the oppressive darkness. It was Zara who found her. They had been searching for nearly 5 hours when Zara suddenly stopped in a corridor intersection and tilted her head as if listening to something no one else could hear. "There," she said, pointing to what appeared to be a sealed maintenance hatch. "She's in there." Marcus examined the hatch, which showed no signs of recent use. "Zara, the sensors don't show any life signs in this section." "She's there," Zara insisted, with the absolute certainty that children sometimes possess. Marcus looked at Jake, who was staring at the hatch with desperate hope. "Can you get it open?" Jake was already pulling tools from his emergency kit. Emma always said this was her favorite hiding place when we were kids. It's an old storage compartment that's not connected to the main life support grid. It took 15 minutes to cut through the sealed hatch, and when it finally opened, they found Emma Chen, unconscious but alive, huddled in a space barely large enough for her small frame. She had survived by rationing a single water bottle and finding an emergency air recycling unit that had enough power to keep her alive. Jake pulled his sister into his arms, tears streaming down his face as he whispered apologies for not finding her sooner. Emma was weak but conscious, and her first words were to ask if their parents were safe. Marcus watched Jake struggle to explain that their parents were gone, that they were now alone in a galaxy that had little patience for orphaned human children. It was a conversation he recognized from his own experience. The moment when childhood ended and adult responsibilities began, whether you were ready for them or not. Sethis began immediate medical treatment for Emma's dehydration and malnutrition, while Marcus coordinated with the remaining ships for final evacuation. The Endurance would carry the 5 remaining survivors, but it would be a tight fit for the journey to the outer colonies. As they prepared for departure, Marcus realized that their rescue operation had become something larger than anyone had planned. Word had spread through the independent trader network about the Kepler station evacuation, and similar operations were being organized at other endangered settlements throughout hegemony space. "You've started something," Dr. Sethis observed as they sealed the last of the emergency supplies aboard the Endurance. "The hegemony won't ignore this kind of organized resistance." Marcus activated the ship's departure sequence, feeling the familiar vibration as the engines powered up. "Maybe it's time they learned that humans don't abandon each other." As the Endurance pulled away from Kepler Station, Marcus took one last look at the damaged structure that had been home to thousands of beings who had believed in the dream of interspecies cooperation. Now it hung dark and lifeless in space, another monument to the failure of good intentions in a galaxy where power mattered more than principles. But in the ship's cramped passenger compartment, 5 survivors were beginning the journey toward new lives and new possibilities. Jake held his sister as she slept, whispering stories about the adventures they would have in the outer colonies. Sethis worked with the 2 engineers to plan the medical support they would need during the journey, and Zara sat quietly beside Marcus in the pilot's chair, watching the stars wheel past as they headed toward an uncertain but hopeful future. "Marcus?" Zara said quietly as they jumped to hyperspace. "Yes?" "Thank you for staying with me." Marcus felt something break and heal simultaneously in his chest. "Thank you for asking me to." As the ship settled into its hyperspace cruise, Marcus began to understand that their escape from Kepler Station was really just the beginning. The galaxy had shown its capacity for cruelty, but humanity had responded with something more powerful than violence or political maneuvering. They had responded with family. The freelance systems had been founded by refugees, smugglers, and independent traders who valued freedom above safety and self-determination above comfort. Centered around 3-star systems that the major galactic powers had deemed too resource-poor to be worth claiming, the freelancers had built a loose confederation of settlements where species, origin, and past mistakes mattered less than a person's willingness to work and contribute to the community. New Haven Station orbited a gas giant in the Kepler 442 system, built from salvaged materials and stubborn determination into something that resembled organized chaos. The station housed nearly 50,000 beings from dozens of species, all united by the shared experience of being unwanted somewhere else. Marcus docked the Endurance at New Haven's public port 6 days after leaving Kepler Station. The journey had been crowded and difficult, but all 5 survivors had endured the trip without serious medical complications. Emma had recovered enough to resume her role as Jake's protective younger sister, while Dr. Sethis and the Tarkri engineers had spent the voyage learning what they could about their new home. Zara had spent most of the journey learning to pilot the ship. Marcus had been surprised by her natural aptitude for navigation and ship handling. Within 3 days, she could plot basic jump coordinates and monitor engine performance with the competence of someone who had been doing it for years. When he complimented her progress, she simply said that her father had taught her that learning new skills was the best way to stay useful. The comment had made Marcus realize how much Zara's short life had already been shaped by the harsh realities of survival in contested space. At 7 years old, she understood that being useful meant being valuable, and being valuable meant being more likely to survive. New Haven's docking facility was managed by a collective of former trade union organizers who had fled Earth during the resource wars.
They processed the Endurance's passenger manifest with efficient compassion, providing temporary housing assignments and work placement interviews for the survivors within hours of their arrival.
Jake and Emma were placed with a family of human colonists who had lost their own teenage son in a mining accident and were eager to provide support for other young people.
Dr. Sethis was recruited immediately by the station's medical staff, which desperately needed qualified physicians who could treat multiple species. The 2 Tarkri engineers found positions with the maintenance crews that kept New Haven's cobbled-together infrastructure functioning. But when the placement officer reviewed Zara's file, she frowned and looked up at Marcus with concern. Captain Chen, there appears to be an irregularity with the child's documentation. Her emergency refugee status lists her next of kin as deceased, but her dependency assignment shows you as her guardian. Do you have legal custody papers? Marcus felt Zara's hand tighten in his. They had discussed this moment during the journey, but he still wasn't sure how to navigate the bureaucratic complexities of adopting a child across species boundaries while technically being fugitives from hegemony justice. It's complicated, Marcus said carefully. Her parents were killed during the attack on Kepler Station. She asked me to take care of her, and I agreed. The placement officer, a middle-aged woman with the patient expression of someone who had seen every possible human tragedy, studied them both for several long seconds. Captain, I appreciate your intentions, but caring for a child requires more than goodwill. She needs stability, education, social interaction with other children. You're a cargo hauler working dangerous routes through contested space. That's not exactly an environment suitable for raising a 7-year-old. Marcus had been expecting this conversation, but hearing it stated so bluntly still felt like a punch to the stomach. Everything the woman was saying made logical sense. Zara deserved better than life aboard a cargo ship, moving from system to system with no permanent home and no guarantee of safety. But when he looked down at Zara, she was staring up at him with an expression of quiet trust that made his decision simple. Ma'am, with respect, Zara has already lived through the destruction of her home and the murder of her family. She's seen the galaxy at its worst, and she's still choosing to trust someone who promised to take care of her. I'm not going to break that promise because it's inconvenient. The placement officer sighed. Captain, I understand your emotional attachment to the situation, but I want to stay with him, Zara said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She rarely spoke during official conversations, preferring to observe and listen rather than call attention to herself.
Zara, the placement officer said gently, there are wonderful families here who could give you a proper home.
You could go to school with other children, have friends your own age, grow up somewhere safe.
Zara considered this seriously, the way she seemed to consider everything.
What happens if the hegemony comes here? The question hung in the air like an accusation. New Haven Station was officially neutral territory, but everyone knew that neutrality lasted only as long as it remained convenient for the major powers. The freelance systems have treaties with all the major galactic governments, the placement officer said, though her voice lacked conviction. We're protected by international law. So was Kepler Station, Zara replied with devastating simplicity. Marcus felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest as he watched this 7-year-old child calmly demolish the adult fantasy that safety could be guaranteed by paperwork and good intentions. Zara's right, he said. The galaxy isn't safe for humans right now, no matter where we try to hide. At least if she's with me, I can promise that someone will fight for her if the worst happens. The placement officer looked between them, clearly struggling with regulations that hadn't been written for situations like this. Finally, she made a decision that would change both their lives. Captain Chen. New Haven Station operates under freelance systems law, which recognizes emergency guardianship agreements in cases of humanitarian crisis. I'm going to process Zara's placement as a temporary emergency custody arrangement, renewable every 6 months pending review of her welfare and educational progress. Marcus felt relief wash over him. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This arrangement comes with conditions. Zara will need regular medical checkups, educational assessments, and social welfare reviews. If at any point we determine that her well-being is being compromised by this living situation, we reserve the right to reconsider placement options. Zara looked up at Marcus. Does that mean we can stay together? It means we're going to try, Marcus replied, squeezing her hand gently. Over the next 3 weeks, Marcus learned that caring for a child involved challenges he had never anticipated. Zara needed clothes that fit her growing frame, educational materials appropriate for her age level, and social interaction with other children to maintain healthy psychological development. New Haven Station provided most of these resources through community programs designed to support refugee families. But Marcus quickly realized that his career as an independent cargo hauler would need significant modifications if he was going to provide Zara with anything approaching a normal childhood. The solution came from an unexpected source. Captain Torres found Marcus in one of New Haven's recreation areas, watching Zara play a strategy game with a group of human and alien children who had become her friends over the past weeks.
She's smart, Torres observed, settling into the chair beside Marcus.
Beats most of those kids at every game they play, but she's careful not to make them feel bad about it. Her father taught her to pay attention to details, Marcus replied. I think she learned early that understanding other people was a survival skill. Torres nodded thoughtfully. Speaking of survival skills, I've got a proposition for you. Marcus turned to face his old friend. I'm listening. The refugee evacuation from Kepler Station has gotten attention. Good attention. The Independent Traders Union is putting together a formal humanitarian response network, ships and crews dedicated to evacuating endangered settlements before the hegemony can finish them off. Sounds dangerous. It is, but it's also necessary work, and it pays well enough to support a family. Torres paused. They're offering you a command position. Bigger ship, steady crew, operations based out of New Haven so Zara could have a stable home while you're on missions. Marcus looked across the recreation area at Zara, who was patiently teaching a young Takri child the finer points of three-dimensional chess. She had adapted to life on New Haven with remarkable resilience, making friends and excelling in her educational assessments despite the trauma she had endured. What kind of timeline are we talking about? He asked. The position starts in 2 months. Long enough for you to get Zara settled into permanent housing and enrolled in New Haven's school system. Should stay here with a host family while you're on missions, but you'd be home between operations.
It was a perfect solution to their immediate problems, but Marcus felt a familiar unease about leaving Zara with strangers, even temporarily.
She had already been abandoned once by circumstances beyond her control. That evening, he discussed the opportunity with Zara over dinner in their temporary quarters aboard the Endurance. It would mean I'd be away sometimes, he explained. But you'd have a real home, with other families nearby and friends from school. And when I came back, we'd have time together without worrying about cargo schedules or dangerous shipping routes. Zara listened carefully, asking occasional questions about the host family arrangements and how long the missions typically lasted. Finally, she set down her fork and looked at him with those impossibly serious eyes. Would you be helping other children like me?
Marcus nodded.
That's the plan. There are a lot of human settlements in hegemony space that might need evacuation if the situation gets worse.
And you'd come back? Always, Marcus promised.
Zara smiled then, not the careful, measured expression she usually wore around other adults, but the genuine happiness of a child who had found something worth believing in. Then I think it's a good idea. The next morning, Marcus contacted Torres and accepted the position. Within a week, he had found a suitable living arrangement for Zara with the Nakamura family, human colonists who had raised 3 children of their own and understood the particular challenges facing refugee children. Nakamura was a former teacher who now worked with New Haven's educational administration, while her husband managed one of the station's hydroponic farms. Their own children had grown up and moved to other settlements, leaving them with an empty home and a wealth of parenting experience. She's welcome to stay as long as necessary, Mrs. Nakamura assured Marcus as they completed the placement paperwork. We understand that your work is important. Giving children like Zara a chance at a normal life is worth some temporary family separation. As they prepared for Marcus's first mission with the Humanitarian Response Network, he realized that their arrangement represented something larger than individual survival. They were creating an extended family structure that could adapt to the realities of life in contested space, where traditional family models might not be practical or safe. Zara understood this too. On the night before Marcus's departure, she gave him a small device she had built from spare electronics. "It's a communication relay," she explained. "Mrs. Nakamura helped me program it. No matter how far away you are, you can always send me a message." Marcus examined the device, impressed by the sophistication of her work. "This is remarkable, Zara. Your father would be proud." "I want you to promise me something," she said seriously. "What's that?" "Promise me that when you find other children who need help, you'll remember that they're not just refugees or problems to be solved. They're people who had families and homes and dreams before the war took everything away." Marcus knelt down and pulled her into a hug, understanding that this 7-year-old girl had just articulated the moral foundation of everything they were trying to build. "I promise," he whispered. 3 days later, Marcus departed New Haven Station aboard the Liberation, a converted cargo vessel equipped for large-scale evacuation operations. As his ship jumped to hyperspace, he carried with him not just orders for his first rescue mission, but the knowledge that he now had someone waiting for him to come home. For the first time in years, Marcus Chen had a family worth fighting for. 6 months into Marcus's work with the Humanitarian Response Network, the Liberation had successfully evacuated 4 endangered settlements and rescued over 2,000 civilians from hegemony persecution. The ship's crew had evolved from a collection of independent traders into a tight-knit family united by their shared mission of protecting the vulnerable. But it was Zara who had become the heart of their operation. During Marcus's time on New Haven Station between missions, Zara had developed an extraordinary talent for analyzing the intelligence reports that guided their rescue operations. Her ability to identify patterns in seemingly random information had proven invaluable in predicting which settlements would be targeted next by hegemony forces. "She sees connections that our professional analysts miss," explained Commander Sarah Kim, who now served as the network's intelligence coordinator. "Last month, she identified a pattern in hegemony patrol schedules that allowed us to evacuate the Tau Ceti research station 3 days before it was attacked." Marcus watched through the Liberation's view screen as they approached Haven Prime, a mining colony built into an asteroid cluster in the Outer Rim. Intelligence reports suggested the colony might be targeted within the next week, but the 12,000 inhabitants had been reluctant to abandon their homes based on speculation. "Settlement Command, this is Captain Chen aboard the Liberation," Marcus broadcast as they entered the asteroid field. "We're here to discuss evacuation protocols for your civilian population." The response came back terse and unwelcoming. "Captain Chen, Haven Prime is a sovereign colony operating under legitimate mining contracts. We don't require evacuation assistance." Marcus sighed. It was a conversation he had had too many times over the past months. Many settlements preferred to believe that compliance with hegemony regulations would protect them from the kind of attacks that had destroyed Kepler Station. "Colony Leader Petrov, I understand your position, but our intelligence indicates your intelligence is based on rumors and speculation," the colony leader interrupted. "We have official assurances from Hegemony Command that our mining operations are in full compliance with territorial agreements." Through the comm system, Marcus heard Zara's voice from her seat at the communications station. She had insisted on joining this mission, arguing that her skills were needed to properly assess the colony's situation. "Colony Leader Petrov," Zara said in her calm, serious voice, "can you access your mining production reports from the past 3 months?" A pause. "Who is this?" "This is Zara Chen, intelligence analyst for the Humanitarian Response Network. I'd like you to look at your extraction yields and compare them to the quarterly projections you filed with Hegemony Mining Administration." Another pause. Longer this time. "I don't see how that's relevant to—" "You're 17% ahead of your projected yields," Zara continued. "That means your mining operation is more valuable than the Hegemony expected when they granted your territorial permit. Yesterday, the Hegemony Territorial Council voted to reclassify resource-rich independent colonies as strategic assets requiring direct administration." Marcus watched the main display as Haven Prime's docking ports began sealing and the colony's defensive platforms came online. The colony leader's voice, when it came back over the comm, carried a new tension.
"How did you obtain classified Hegemony Council proceedings?"
"I didn't," Zara replied.
I analyzed 47 previous cases where independent colonies were attacked after exceeding their projected resource yields.
The pattern is consistent. Colonies that become too valuable are deemed security risks and eliminated. Silence stretched across the comm channel for nearly a minute before colony leader Petrov spoke again. Captain Chen, how long do we have? Marcus looked at his tactical display, noting the energy signatures that indicated hegemony patrol ships were already moving toward the asteroid field. 6 hours, maybe less, but we have a fleet standing by. If your people are willing to move quickly, we can evacuate the entire civilian population before the hegemony arrives. The evacuation of Haven Prime became a model for the efficient coordination that the Humanitarian Response Network had developed over months of operations. Within 4 hours, 17 ships had arrived to assist with the evacuation, ranging from massive cargo haulers to small personal transports volunteered by individual families who remembered being refugees themselves. Marcus coordinated the operation from the Liberations Bridge, while Zara managed the complex logistics of moving 12,000 people and their essential possessions across multiple ships with different capabilities and destinations. The Wandering Star can take 800 civilians to the Kepler 438 system, she reported, her fingers dancing across multiple displays as she tracked refugee assignments and ship capacities. The Iron Phoenix has space for 600-plus medical equipment. Captain Torres says he can make 2 trips if necessary. Marcus watched his adopted daughter manage an operation that would have challenged experienced military logistics officers and felt a mixture of pride and sadness. Zara's remarkable competence was the result of trauma that no child should have to endure. She had learned to see patterns in chaos because her survival had depended on understanding the motivations of people who viewed her existence as expendable. As the last civilian transport cleared the asteroid field, hegemony assault ships emerged from hyperspace and began their bombardment of Haven Prime's industrial facilities. The mining platforms and residential modules that had housed 12,000 people for over a decade were reduced to glowing debris within hours. But every single civilian had escaped. That night, as the refugee fleet made its way to safety in the Freelance systems, Marcus found Zara in the Liberations observation deck, staring out at the stars with the thoughtful expression she wore when processing difficult emotions.
You saved 12,000 lives today, he said, settling into the chair beside her.
We saved them, she corrected. But for how long? The hegemony isn't going to stop with Haven Prime. They're systematically eliminating every independent human settlement that represents a potential threat to their authority. Marcus had been thinking the same thing. Over the past 6 months, they had evacuated 14 settlements and watched all of them be destroyed within days of their departure. They were winning individual battles but losing the larger war for human independence in the Outer Rim. What do you think we should do? He asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Zara was quiet for several minutes, staring out at the hyperspace tunnel that carried them toward New Haven Station. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the kind of certainty that adults spent decades learning to question. We need to stop running.
What do you mean?
Every time we evacuate a settlement, we're admitting that humans don't have the right to exist in contested space. We're accepting the hegemony's premise that human independence is temporary and that our communities exist only as long as they're convenient for other species. Marcus felt a chill as he realized she was articulating thoughts he had been afraid to acknowledge. Zara, fighting the hegemony directly would mean war, a war humanity would almost certainly lose. Would we? She asked, turning to face him. The hegemony's strength comes from their ability to eliminate human settlements one at a time, before they can coordinate effective resistance. But what if we stopped running and started building something they couldn't destroy? What kind of something? Zara activated the observation deck's display screen and began pulling up star charts and settlement data. Her fingers moved across the interface with the fluidity of someone who had grown up with advanced technology. Look at the pattern of our evacuation operations, she said, highlighting the locations where they had successfully rescued civilian populations. We've created a diaspora of 12 million human refugees scattered across 67 different systems. Most of them are grateful to the Humanitarian Response Network. All of them remember that we saved their lives when their own governments abandoned them. Marcus studied the display and began to understand what she was suggesting. You're talking about organizing the refugees into a political movement. I'm talking about organizing them into a civilization, Zara corrected. The hegemony can destroy individual settlements, but they can't eliminate an entire culture spread across multiple star systems and unified by shared values. The scope of what she was proposing took Marcus's breath away. Zara, that would require coordination on a scale that humanity has never attempted. The logistics alone are complex but manageable, she finished. The refugee families trust us. They've seen that the Humanitarian Response Network keeps its promises. If we ask them to contribute resources toward building a permanent solution to human displacement, most would agree. Marcus looked at the star chart showing the scattered refugee populations and began to see what Zara was seeing. Not just displaced families seeking shelter, but the foundation of a new kind of human society based on mutual aid and collective survival, rather than competition for scarce resources. It would take years to organize, he said. Maybe decades. The hegemony spent 50 years systematically undermining human independence, Zara replied. If we're going to build something that lasts, we need to think in generational timeframes. As they discussed the practical challenges of coordinating a multi-system human civilization, Marcus realized that somewhere in the past 6 months, their roles had quietly reversed. Zara was no longer the child seeking protection. She had become the visionary planning humanity's future, while he was the cautious adult, worried about the practical difficulties of implementing her ideas. Over the following weeks, Zara's proposal began to take shape as something more concrete than philosophical speculation. Working with the Humanitarian Response Network's leadership, she developed a comprehensive plan for creating what she called the Human Resilience Initiative, a federation of refugee settlements connected by shared resources, coordinated defense agreements, and cultural exchange programs. The initiative's first test case would be the establishment of New Kepler Station, a massive habitat built in the neutral zone between hegemony and freelance systems territory. Unlike traditional space stations, New Kepler would be designed as a mobile facility capable of relocating if threatened, with a population large enough to maintain economic and cultural independence. It's ambitious, admitted Commander Torres as they reviewed construction proposals in New Haven's administrative offices. Maybe impossibly ambitious. But if it works, we prove that humans can build something the hegemony can't destroy, Marcus finished. Something worth preserving instead of just something worth evacuating. Zara looked up from the engineering schematic she had been studying. Captain Torres, do you remember what you told me the day we met? You said I could do worse for a father. Torres nodded, wondering where the conversation was heading. Well, Zara continued with a slight smile, humanity could do worse for a future. As construction began on New Kepler Station, Marcus realized that his decision to stay with a frightened child on a dying space station had led to something he never could have anticipated. They weren't just saving individual lives anymore. They were creating the foundation for humanity's continued existence among the stars. And it had all started with a 7-year-old girl who had been brave enough to ask for help and stubborn enough to believe that help would come. 2 years after the evacuation of Kepler Station, New Kepler Station achieved full operational status as the first truly independent human settlement in contested space. The massive habitat housed over 100,000 beings, primarily human refugees, but also members of other species who had chosen to join the Human Resilience Initiative's experiment in multicultural cooperation. Marcus stood in the station's central observation lounge, watching construction crews put the finishing touches on the agricultural sections that would make New Kepler completely self-sufficient. Through the transparent aluminum viewport, he could see the defensive platforms that protected their new home. Not the crude weapons of desperate refugees, but sophisticated systems designed by the best military engineers that 12 million grateful survivors could provide. Zara, now 9 years old, but carrying herself with the confidence of someone much older, joined him at the viewport. She wore the blue uniform of New Kepler's administrative staff, though her official title of Strategic Planning Coordinator barely captured the scope of her influence on the station's operations. The Hegemony Response Fleet will arrive in 6 hours, she reported, consulting the tablet that had become her constant companion. 47 ships, including 3 heavy battle cruisers. They're not here to negotiate. Marcus nodded grimly. They had known this day would come. New Kepler Station represented everything the hegemony feared about human independence. Proof that humanity could thrive without submitting to alien authority. The station's mere existence challenged the political framework that kept humans as second-class citizens throughout the galaxy. Are our people ready? He asked. All civilian populations have been evacuated to the secondary habitat modules, Zara confirmed. Essential staff are maintaining minimum operations from the protected sections. Captain Torres has tactical command of our defense fleet, and the refugee colonies in 12 systems are standing by to provide support if needed. Marcus felt a familiar mixture of pride and amazement as he listened to his adopted daughter coordinate a defensive operation that would have challenged seasoned military commanders. Over the past 2 years, Zara had grown into her role as the visionary behind the Human Resilience Initiative, but she had never lost the compassion that had made her ask a stranger to be her father. "Zara," he said quietly, "you know that whatever happens today, you've already changed everything, right? Even if we lose New Kepler, the network will survive. The colonies will remember what we built here." She looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much but still carried hope. "We're not going to lose." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the station's communication system activated with an incoming transmission from the approaching Hegemony fleet. "New Kepler Station, this is Admiral Threkus of the Hegemony Territorial Defense Force. You are in violation of territorial agreements and harboring fugitive populations. Surrender your station for inspection or be destroyed." Marcus activated the reply channel. "Admiral Threkus, this is Captain Marcus Chen, commanding New Kepler Station. We are operating in neutral space under salvage and construction rights granted by the Freelance Systems Council. We claim no territorial authority and pose no threat to hegemony interests." The reply came back sharp with anger. "Captain Chen, your station houses refugee populations from 14 settlements that were destroyed for harboring human resistance activities. By providing shelter for these fugitives, you have made yourself an enemy of the hegemony state." Marcus was about to respond when Zara gently took the communication device from his hand. "Admiral Threkus," she said in her calm, serious voice. "This is Zara Chen, Strategic Planning Coordinator for the Human Resilience Initiative. Before you proceed with hostile action, I'd like you to consider some information that might affect your decision." A pause. Then, "This channel is for military communications between commanding officers. Remove the child and resume proper protocols." Zara smiled, not the careful expression she usually wore around hostile aliens, but the genuine amusement of someone who held better cards than their opponent realized. "Admiral, I'm afraid that's not possible. I am the commanding officer for this negotiation. Captain Chen commands our defensive fleet, but strategic decisions are made by civilian leadership, and I have something to show you." Before the Admiral could respond, Zara activated New Kepler Station's external communication array and broadcast a signal that Marcus didn't recognize. Within minutes, ships began emerging from hyperspace around New Kepler Station. Not the refugee transports Marcus had expected, but sleek vessels carrying the identification codes of 12 different species, including several hegemony member governments. "What the hell?" Marcus breathed, watching as the display showed over 200 ships taking defensive positions around their station. Zara activated the station-wide communication system. "Admiral Threkus, you're looking at the first multi-species coalition fleet assembled in defense of civilian refugee populations. These ships represent governments, corporations, and independent organizations from across the galaxy who believe that the systematic persecution of human settlements violates basic principles of interspecies law." The hegemony fleet had stopped its approach and was clearly reassessing the tactical situation. 47 ships against 200 was a losing proposition, even for the technologically superior hegemony forces. "Captain Chen," Admiral Threkus's voice carried a new tension, "explain the meaning of this fleet presence." Marcus looked at Zara, who nodded encouragingly. "Admiral, over the past 2 years, the Human Resilience Initiative has provided humanitarian assistance to refugee populations from 17 different species, not just humans. When word spread about your planned attack on New Kepler Station, those same species voted to provide defensive support." What Marcus didn't say, because he was still learning the scope of what Zara had accomplished, was that the Human Resilience Initiative had become far more than a refugee assistance network. It had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic politics, a confederation based on mutual aid rather than territorial control, where membership was earned through contribution rather than inherited through species or birthplace. "Furthermore," Zara added, consulting her ever-present tablet, "New Kepler Station is currently hosting diplomatic representatives from the Freelance Systems, the Centauri Republic, the Andorian Trade Federation, and the Independent Worlds Alliance. Any military action against this station would be considered an act of war against multiple sovereign governments." Marcus watched the tactical display as the hegemony fleet's formation began to shift into a more defensive posture. Admiral Threkus was clearly communicating with his superiors, trying to determine whether the potential destruction of New Kepler Station was worth triggering a multi-system war. The answer, when it came, surprised everyone. "Captain Chen, Admiral Threkus." A new voice broke into the communication channel. "This is Ambassador Vetherick of the Hegemony Diplomatic Corps. I am authorized to negotiate a peaceful resolution to this situation. Marcus exchanged glances with Zara, who was already pulling up files on her tablet. Ambassador Vathric, Zara responded, the Human Resilience Initiative would be pleased to discuss a diplomatic solution. However, any agreement must include formal recognition of human settlements' right to exist in neutral space and guarantees that refugee populations will not be subject to punitive action for seeking humanitarian assistance. Over the next 6 hours, New Kepler Station became the site of the most significant diplomatic breakthrough in human galactic history. The negotiations, conducted primarily by Zara with Marcus providing strategic support, resulted in the Kepler Accords, a formal agreement that established the right of displaced populations to seek sanctuary in neutral territory and created legal frameworks for multi-species humanitarian cooperation. But more importantly, the Accords recognized the Human Resilience Initiative as a legitimate governmental entity with the authority to speak for its member populations, effectively granting humanity political independence for the first time since contact with the galactic community. As the various fleets began departing and the diplomatic representatives concluded their ceremonies, Marcus found himself alone with Zara in the observation lounge, where the day had begun.
How long have you been planning this? He asked.
About 18 months, she admitted. It started when I realized that the refugee assistance work was creating relationships with species across the galaxy. Every time we saved a mixed population settlement, we proved that humans could be trusted partners rather than just competitors for resources. Marcus shook his head in amazement. Zara, you've just secured humanity's future among the stars. You were 9 years old. I had help, she pointed out. Good people who believed that helping others was more important than protecting themselves. People like Captain Torres, Dr. Decoy, SETI's Commander Kim. People like you. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. Zara, when you asked me to be your father, I thought I was just agreeing to take care of one frightened child. I had no idea that you were agreeing to help raise the person who would change human civilization. She finished with a slight smile. Neither did I. But that's the thing about families. You never know what you're capable of until someone needs you to be more than you thought you could be. As New Kepler Station settled into its new role as the capital of the Human Resilience Initiative, Marcus reflected on the chain of events that had brought them to this moment. It had started with a simple human impulse, the refusal to abandon someone who needed help. That impulse had grown into a rescue operation, then an evacuation network, then a political movement, and finally into something that would reshape humanity's place in the galaxy. But at its core, it was still about the same thing it had always been about, a promise between two people who had chosen to become family. Years later, when historians studied the rise of the Human Resilience Initiative and its impact on galactic civilization, they would focus on economic factors, political alliances, and technological innovations. They would analyze the strategic brilliance of the Kepler Accords and the diplomatic revolution that followed. But Marcus Chen would always remember it differently. He would remember it as the story of a dying station, where a 7-year-old girl had been brave enough to ask for help, and a damaged man had been foolish enough to say yes. He would remember it as proof that sometimes the most important decisions in the universe were made not by governments or military commanders, but by ordinary people who chose to care for each other when everything else had gone wrong. And most of all, he would remember it as evidence of something the galaxy was still learning to understand, that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their stubborn refusal to surrender. Their greatest strength was their inability to stop believing that strangers could become family, that enemies could become allies, and that a single act of compassion could change the course of history. On New Kepler Station in the Central Memorial Hall dedicated to the victims of the settlement attacks, a simple inscription captures the philosophy that guided the Human Resilience Initiative. She looked up at me and whispered, "Will you be my father?" I stayed with her. From that moment, everything changed. Below the inscription, visitors can see a holographic display showing the current status of the Human Resilience Initiative. 347 member settlements, 18 species, 47 million citizens, and growing every day. But Marcus Chen, now Admiral Chen of the initiative's defense fleet, still thinks the most important number is 2. Himself and Zara, the family that started it all. Because in the end, that's what the galaxy learned from humanity's example. That civilization isn't built by conquering enemies or claiming territory. It's built by keeping promises to the people who trust you to stay when everything else falls apart. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, those people help you become someone worth staying for.